Good morning and welcome to Sunday School at Second Baptist. I'm glad you could be with me today. We're going to continue in the book of 1 Thessalonians, and this second lesson comes from chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. This, again, to rehearse from last week, this is a letter from Paul to the church at Thessalonica that had been started, and Paul was there when the church was started, and so now he's writing back to them to give them encouragement, and those are the main things, but maybe to point out some things they need to work on. And so we're going to work through this book and also the next book of 2 Thessalonians, which is another letter that Paul wrote. So for today, let's look at chapter 2 of 1 Thessalonians, and let's begin there with verses 1 and 2. For you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you was not in vain, but after we had already suffered and been mistreated in Philippi, as you know, we had the boldness in our God to speak to you the gospel of God amid much opposition. So you'll recall that, Paul had this dream, the Macedonian call, to come over to Macedonia and preach the gospel. And so they did. They crossed over, into Macedonia. And as they began to preach in Philippi, great crowd rose up against them and caused a lot of problems, to the point that Paul and Silas got thrown into prison there. And then when they got out, they came to Thessalonica. And so in Thessalonica then, Jews, probably some followed them from Philippi, but also other Jews from the synagogue there, stirred up trouble and began to say that these men have changed the world, or have upset the world. I'm reading from Acts chapter 17 and verse 6. These men have upset the world, they said, and they couldn't get hold of them, I guess, to throw them in prison at that point. So what they did was they attacked the house of Jason, one of the believers, and brought Jason and some others in front of the court, and accused them, falsely of some things, to try to get the gospel stopped in that area. And so Paul is referring now that to a couple of things. He says our coming was not in vain, but after we had already suffered and been mistreated in Philippi, we had the boldness in our God to speak to you the gospel of God amid much opposition. So even as they spoke the gospel to them in Thessalonica, there was opposition, first from those in the synagogue, and then maybe others from out of town as well. And so amid persecution, the gospel was spoken, and the gospel took hold amid persecution, because there's a church there now that Paul is writing back to with this letter. He's telling past events and speaking to the church. So there is a church that was established as a result of their ministry. And, it's important for us to think about persecution and sharing the gospel in the midst of persecution, like Paul and Silas did, and those with them, because he persevered in the midst of opposition. It wasn't that they got a little opposition and so they went away. He strongly and courageously continued to share the gospel despite the way that they were being treated. And that is a lesson for us. We don't really have that kind of opposition when we speak about God, or our pastors, when they get up and speak in the church or whatever. They don't have that kind of opposition to stand up and shout and create a riot, or haul us all down to the court, because of, and say that we're causing trouble. We don't have those things. If we did, I think it would, just like it did with the Thessalonians, it might serve a purpose to unify the believers in our town. Let's just use Waycross as an example. If all of a sudden all the churches were being attacked, well then it would not be strange for us to feel that we could bond together with the Methodist and the Assemblies of God or whoever and say, let's all pray together. Let's all meet together. Let's support each other, whatever. So at times when persecution comes, it actually causes the church to be stronger and more courageous than it might be otherwise. So, that's something to think about. Paul said they were treated badly in Philippi, or outrageously, it says in your book. And so let's read verses 3 and 4 now. For our exhortation does not come from error or impurity or by way of deceit, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God who examines our hearts. And that word that he uses there, where he says we have been approved by God, that's an interesting word, because the connotation of that word is like what it referred to in the Greek was like the testing of metal to see if it was genuine, like pure gold or something like that, like a scientific test, to be tested or approved, a stamp of authenticity, I guess you might say, something like that, is kind of the word or the connotation that he was using there. So he says, we didn't come to you from error or impurity or by way of deceit. We haven't come to deceive you with the words that we've said, but we have been authenticated by God, I'm going to fill that in there, to be entrusted with the gospel. They've been found worthy to be entrusted with the gospel. And so we speak not as to please men, but God who examines our hearts. And again, that examining of the heart is that same root word of testing or authenticity. So they are sharing the gospel not to please men, but to please God. And when you do that, when you make a statement or share the gospel in a way to please God and not to please men, then you may do it in a different way. If you said it to please men, you might try to say it in a funny, intriguing way to make them think that, this is interesting, and you might try to capture their attention, with your funny words or your jokes or other things like that. You might water it down to say, well, I'm not going to tell them that because that might hurt their feelings. I'm going to stick to this right here. That'll make everybody feel good. That kind of thing. And so, Paul is saying we didn't share this to try to please you. We shared this to try to please God, because he's the one that has given us the right or the authenticity to share this message. And that's important. to examine all of our activities and the way that we speak to people about the gospel. The gospel is an offense. It says somewhere, I didn't look up that verse, but the gospel is an offense to people who are being lost. No doubt about it. You know, it offends them to maybe to hear that the actions or activities that they're doing are against what the Bible teaches. And of course we try. I mean, you know, you're not going to win someone by attacking their religion, and in some cases the thing that the person has decided to follow is like a religion to them, you know, not only the religion of, you know, what, Islam or whatever, but if they religiously are greedy, for example, then for you to come with verses about that and try to point it out to them and call them out on it, I guess you might say, you won't necessarily win them over or get their attention or get them to listen. You know, so you do have to choose your words wisely, I guess you might say, but at the same time, the gospel is what it is, and the words of Jesus are what they are, and that may be an offense to some people. Now let's go on and look at verses 5 and 6. For we never came with flattering speech, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed, God is witness, nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, even though as apostles of Christ we might have asserted our authority. So Paul's kind of touching on a couple of things there. He talks about the flattering speech. We didn't come to try to make you feel good about yourself by the fancy words that we used about you and all that, you know. And we didn't come out of a pretext for greed. And, apparently that was a problem, as it is today, where preachers were going around and speaking, and the main purpose for their speaking was to get a lot of money for themselves. And, definitely this still happens even today. And so Paul is saying that, that was not our purpose, was to come and try to get money or to flatter you. We did not seek glory from men, so they didn't come to try to get glory for themselves. And he says, even though we are apostles of Christ, we might have exerted our authority. So, they felt that they were some of the main leaders of the church at that time, I guess. They could have come in with an attitude of, we're the bosses, we're the authority, look down on other people. They could have had that attitude. But he says we did not do that. And so let's go on then from there to verse 7. But we proved to be gentle among you as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children. So he says, our attitude was one of gentleness, like a mother trying to take care of her children and treat them gently like a baby, like you might treat a baby. And it has to be that way especially with someone who is a new Christian. You have to overlook some things that they might do that are still, they haven't been discipled. They haven't learned that they shouldn't do those things. So you have to treat them gently, in the way that you respond when they do something that you might disagree with. And gently share the gospel, not in an aggressive or a harsh way, but gently sharing the gospel, because the gospel is powerful when it is shared, and God is the one that does the work. It's not up to us to shove it down someone's throat. God will do the work if we'll just open up our mouths and share the gospel. Then in verse 8, Paul says, having so fond an affection for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become very dear to us. So he's saying, that we care a lot about you. We came to care greatly for you and feel affection for you as a group. So not only did we share the gospel, but we shared our lives together. And, of course, in that initial visit, Paul and Silas were only there, 3 weeks, I think? And then, or they shared in the synagogue. You go back and glance at it. They, for 3 Sabbaths, reasoned in the synagogue, and then a large number of both Jews and Greeks followed. Now, they must have been also sharing outside the synagogue, because the Greeks, would not have been in the synagogue. That was another point to think about. And then finally, the final verses 9 to 12. For you recall, brethren, our labor and hardship, how working night and day so as not to be a burden to any of you, we proclaim to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and so is God, how devoutly and uprightly and blamelessly we behave toward you believers. Just as you know how we were exhorting and encouraging and imploring each one of you as a father would his own children, so that you would walk in a manner worthy of the God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. So here Paul is saying, we worked hard while we were among you. And I thought about that a little bit. Did Paul, in order to, I guess you might say, earn their keep, did they come in and do some odd jobs or something like that to earn money to get their food, or did they pay for their own food as they were there? And he's just simply saying that we worked hard in sharing the gospel. We worked day and night to do so. I'm not sure, which one it is. Paul, in other places, we learned that Paul was a tent maker by trade. And so, it's possible, if he was a tent maker, that he came in and worked during the day and then shared the gospel at night or something like that, did repairs. I mean, you can use your imagination and think that it's possible something like that happened. But at any rate, they tried very hard not to be a burden to the people as they were there sharing the gospel. Not showing up and trying to share with people and at the same time have those people provide everything for you. That would be, again, that idea of not being greedy or trying to, see what you could get for yourself. And then at the end of that, he talks about how he treated them as a father would his own children. So again, back to the parent reference, that, a father treats children different than a mother does, where a mother is gentle and, tries to be as kind as possible to the children and, teach them in that way. A father exhorts, at times, and lets them know that, hey, you're doing something I don't like, or you've crossed the line. I mean, mothers do that too, I guess, but, fathers just have the father way of doing things. And so, he's saying that we exhorted you and encouraged you, imploring you, as a father would do. And so, really, I guess trying to get their attention in the way that a father might do, to say, hey, you need to listen to this. I was thinking this week of Clint's Uncle J.W. that lives in Baxley. And I just have always thought it was interesting the way he says things in the phrase that he uses, because when in the course of conversation, when he's saying something that he wants you to be sure and listen to, or that he's making a statement of fact that you should understand, he'll say, now see here this, or now see here that, And when he says that, he's about to say something that you should listen to, because it's going to really add value to the conversation, I guess you might say. And so, I thought of that when I was thinking of Paul exhorting them to listen to the gospel. He was saying it in a way to say, now see here, listen to this. This is important for you to hear this. And then at the very end, he says the reason that, we exhorted you and shared and encouraged and whatever is so that you would walk in a manner worthy of the God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. And, that's just something for all of us to live by, that we would walk in a manner worthy of the God who called us to be Christians. I don't think any of us can say we've attained to that we've accomplished it. We walk in a manner worthy. We don't. Even no matter how hard we try, we won't. We are going to mess up at times, but our goal should be to walk in a manner worthy of the God who has called us into his kingdom. And that changes the way we look at ourselves and the way we look at the gospel, if we can think of that in that way, to walk in a manner worthy of the God who has called us. We are ambassadors for Christ, it says in the Bible. We represent Christ to the world, and even more so these days, as there's so many different hopeless and dark situations happening in our country and around the world. We can hopefully let our light shine in the midst of that darkness, and to let people know that there is a way to be, there is a way to follow, that is a way of hope and love and peace and acceptance, And so it's important for us to think this week on walking in a manner worthy. Now, next week is Easter Sunday. And so, we're off on our book. We've had this discussion before. And so the book goes right on and continues in 1 Thessalonians. But what we're going to do is we're going to skip forward to lesson 7 for next week, which was the lesson that they had inserted for Easter. So it's completely not this scripture. It's Matthew chapter 28. So if you want to read Matthew chapter 28, then you'll be ready for the lesson next week. And we'll have that one for Easter Sunday. And then we're going to come right back to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 after that. So thank you for being with me, and I'll see you next time.